Mom, Dad, there's no way that I can express to you what I'm feeling right now. My heart is full to bursting, except to say, I'm the king of the world!
Hello, welcome back to Cameron, King of the World. And finally, I get to just sit down and talk about a film directed by James Cameron. I mean, we've talked about kind of his early days and Xenogenesis and the flying piranhas and all that stuff, but now it's just time to just talk about the fucking Terminator. Oh, I don't say a relief, but you know, it's almost like it was almost painful to go through the experience of talking about Piranha 2 and watching Piranha 2 and trying to figure out exactly what went on with that movie. Whereas the Terminator, it's a bit more clear cut, and the road to it happening was certainly an interesting one. And one thing I didn't actually mention that I should have in the previous video is the Actually, I'll leave it for the end of this video. There's a little bit of controversy about the origins of the Terminator and whether or not James Cameron's idea was entirely original, but we'll get to that in just a moment. The interesting thing about this is that I can now start talking a little bit about my own personal experiences, because with Piranha 2, I had none. With Xenogenesis, I had none. With looking into the background of the making of Piranha 2, I didn't really have much prior knowledge on that. The Terminator, I knew some stuff, but not as much as I did when kind of looking into it for this series. But experiences with the actual film that we're going to talk about in this video, I have a lot. And a lot of it is hazy because we're going back, 20 plus years, but this is a film that I grew up with and loved as a kid. I watched it far too young, I think, but at the same time, I turned out okay. I wasn't traumatized by it. It didn't make me become a ruthless killer, and I think I'm a pretty decent person. So I don't know. It's interesting. I think that I understand the age ratings. I understand the concerns of showing violence to children, and I even would say that maybe kids need to be, have a more of an innocent upbringing for longer than kids like me who grew up with films like The Terminator, which, certainly wasn't, I don't know, I'm just thinking about it from the perspective of my mother. Like, I really wanted to watch this film. Like, it was Terminator, Terminator 2, Aliens. Those were kind of the three big ones. Predator, I think, was up there as well, where they would be on TV and my mum or my dad's, if I was at my dad, would say, no, look away from the TV, you can't watch this. And it was almost that kind of like, you want to do it because you know that you're not supposed to, you want to see it because you know that you're not supposed to. And I was aware of Terminator 2 much more than the first Terminator. I'd seen bits of it. My cousin was watching it once and I saw the opening scene at the bar and was very much like, oh my god, what is this? And my mum had the VHS tapes for Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. And so I really wanted to watch them. And Aliens was the big one, that, and maybe I'll talk about that in a later video, of course, but I think once the seal had been broken with Aliens, it was kind of like, okay, can I watch Alien now? And then the Terminator films. And my mum would say, well, when you're old enough. And so I specifically and vividly remember I was living in England at the time, on this military base town, garrison town, I think they called them. And it was actually quite close to Stonehenge. I could almost see it from my bedroom window. But that's neither here nor there. But I remember being in my bedroom and just thinking to myself, in the middle of the night even, looking out into the hallway, I can still see like the orangey glow of the hall by the stairs, and me lying in bed and thinking, okay, how many years until I'm 15? Because Terminator 2 was rated 15, whereas the Terminator was an 18. And so it was like, but then I won't be able to see the first one first. And even as a kid, I felt there was some sort of, what's the word? I felt that there was something to be upheld in terms of watching a film series in order. Like, there was a certain respect that needed to be paid to a series of movies where you need to see the first one before you can appreciate the sequel. You need to see the original first. And I honestly can't tell you how it went down. I vaguely remember watching it for the first time, but I don't. There's not really in specifics, but I do remember being quite shocked by it and feeling like it wasn't what I was expecting. It wasn't like the bits of Terminator 2 that I had seen, and maybe I had seen Terminator 2 first. I don't know. I remember quite vividly watching the opening credits of Terminator 2, but again, these things are so far back, and that it didn't hold the kind of special place in my heart that Aliens did. That was a whole other beast, no pun intended. Whereas Terminator was just like, I want to see, and maybe that was, apart from George Lucas, the first time I was really like aware of a director, because it was like, oh, this is the guy who did Aliens. This is like this film had been built up in my head for so long. And again, that's a story I've told so many times. I guess I'll tell it in this series again just for kind of posterity. But I have a very personal connection to Aliens, and I guess I would have thought to myself, well, if the same guy who made Aliens made Terminator 1 and 2, they must be pretty damn good. And then holy shit, Titanic came around, and I think I'd seen them by the time Titanic came out, so I must have been at least 9 years old, if not 8, when I saw that's crazy to me, because in my mind's eye it feels like I saw them when I was 12, 13. My mum let me watch them a few years before I became the legal age to watch these films on, in the cinema, I suppose, and or to buy them in a shop. But yeah, I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. I definitely had seen the Alien movies by 1997. But yeah, so Titanic came out, and it was like, oh, I loved Titanic. So it was like, wow, this guy who's made all these different movies. So I really wanted to see the Terminator films, and yeah, I remember enjoying the Terminator, and then I loved Terminator 2. But there's something really unsettling about the original, and me and Connie reviewed it for the Epic Film Challenge 2, 1,001 movies you must see before you die, and so I've kind of covered Terminator, but I think there's always something to say about Terminator, and I might repeat myself. I didn't go back to that video we did a few years ago to make sure I didn't repeat myself, and I think I found that interesting just to see if I would repeat myself or not. Am I getting new things out of the movie, or is it the same thing? I don't think I've seen the Terminator more than 3 times in the past 10 years, and I like it that way. Like I enjoy drip feeding myself viewings of this film, because every time genuinely feels like, oh wow, I'd forgotten how great this really was. And then I spend a few years going, well, it's not as good as the second one, and it's a bit rough around the edges. And then you watch it again, it's like, holy shit, this is something special about this film. And I think that comes from the making of it, and how, as I mentioned in the previous video, the kind of guerrilla style filmmaking that was going on in some of the kind of sequences in the Terminator, in terms of just throwing it together. Some of the stuff was literally like done like after principal photography had finished, and they ran out and went to the desert and like got a shot without a permit. They did everything they could to make this film work, and I think that it shows on every frame, every shot of the movie. And it just has an energy to it that is really, I don't say it's lacking from more modern films, but that energy feels born out of necessity. The kind of the Kyle Reese, like just landing in that kind of dirty alleyway, just feels like James Cameron just running through the door of Hollywood, being like, fuck, right now I'm gonna do it. It ain't gonna be pretty, and we're gonna be running the whole. This is gonna be like a proper like on the run, experience. But we're gonna do it, and we're gonna make a movie, and it's gonna be something that people are gonna. Their ears are going to prick up, and they're going to notice, whether it's good or it's bad, they're going to notice, Kyle Reese running through the street with a sawn-off shotgun tucked underneath a trench coat without a t-shirt on. Like it's it's one of those, like, it grabs you as you see it, and I think the film grabs you as you see it as well. So, again, that was a weird analogy. I'll leave that in for free. But, I feel like that kind of fits. It's that kind of, Cameron just finally made his mark. For good or bad, he was just gonna, like, this is my movie. This is my original piece, and we'll talk about that originalness in just a few minutes, or maybe in 10 or 20 minutes. But I feel like this is Cameron's first movie. This is his first true film. This isn't a film that already had a director on it, and now he's brought in, and then he gets fired, and he's not allowed to even finish the movie. This is, from bell to bell, a James Cameron, authored production. And you do get into the kind of hero worshipping of directors, and deifying directors, and I'm certainly guilty of that. And here I am doing a series focused on the director. It takes a good producer. It takes a lot of people to make a great movie. But I also think there is something to the auteur theory, and also just to the fact that James Cameron, he has a really specific idea of the way he wants things to be done. And so he kind of rules with an iron fist, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the series. But, I think that he has this kind of very strong vision, and it all started with that image of this metal man coming through the fire with a kitchen knife. And that becomes what we see at the end of the film, when the Terminator is burned down to the endoskeleton, this kind of just hellish vision. And so this isn't really going to be a traditional review of or anything and going through the plot. But, you know, if you're watching this far, you know what Terminator is. You don't need to have everything set up. But yeah, it's I'm just trying to think like how to approach this really. But I suppose just talking about how I felt watching it again, it felt like the most I've ever enjoyed it. And that honestly seems to be a running theme in me rewatching some of these Cameron films for this series. I think, wow, I've never enjoyed that as much as I have right now. And that's a really good sign. Like, honestly, sometimes films I loved when I was younger, I'll watch them again. I'll really enjoy them. The nostalgia burst is like so fresh. But it's kind of like, well, it's, you know, it's you know, I probably enjoyed it more when I was younger, that kind of thing. But this, like, films like The Terminator, they hold up. And it feels like they shouldn't. It feels like they should be dated. The score, I have to talk about Brad Feidel's score. It's just, I mean, it's all electronic. It's so synthy. It's so machine-like, which is so fitting to the story. But there's just something about it. Like the opening titles, just the text, you know, kind of the text kind of like drifting across the screen in multiple layers and sizes. And you see kind of the cast and the crew. And that kind of, you know, when I think of the Terminator theme, I think of that kind of Terminator 2 style, where, you know, metal on metal, da-dang, dang, da-dang, you know, like, da-da-da, da-da, and the kind of the orchestral kind of, you know, it has a real full sound to it. In the original film, it's like proper electronic. It's proper synthy, and it feels almost like, not unfinished, but it feels like a video game almost. You know, it feels like this beautiful piece of music that is working under the limitations, and I'm sure musicians would disagree with me there, but what it feels like to me is that it's like that great video game music from like the late 80s and early 90s that, you know, it feels like it shouldn't be good because of because of how limited the space they were working with in terms of the storage of putting that music onto the game that could be then read and, you know, come out of the TV and you can hear it. It just feels like it's rising above the equipment that's being used to make it. If that makes any kind of sense, I don't know. There's just a feeling to the score. It doesn't feel as full as the second movie, but if you can hear that helicopter going overhead, and now I'm suddenly reminded of the beginning of the film with the kind of hellish vision of 2029. We're 9 years away now from the future wars, but again, we haven't gone through Judgment Day, so I guess that was one thing. I remember like looking on the back of the VHS cover of Terminator 2 and seeing, you know, August, when was it? August, I forget what it was, August something 1997, and being like, oh my god, there we go. That's another thing that's confirmed it. To me, that felt like a year or two away. So I must have been like 8. Well, then again, I could have read it before I watched it, because I was very into like looking at the VHS covers of films that I knew I couldn't watch. So I don't know, but I remember reading that and thinking, oh, that 97's coming up, you know, in a year or two. So, yeah, anyway, so that's just a whole other thing. So the score, I love it. I really love it. It's menacing. It's just weird, different, you know. Yeah, and it's such a huge part of the film for me is that score. And it just adds a lot of dread and weight to what is, you know, it's essentially a slasher movie. And I think it is a really effective horror film in terms of the way that it presents this unstoppable killer, this unstoppable force, this Michael Myers-like presence. You know, Cameron was inspired by Halloween, as I said in the previous video, and but there's just more, for me, there's more meat to it. No pun intended with Arnold, because I don't know, he's just so unique. You know, just the physique, but also the look. And one thing I'll say is that I noticed watching it this time around, when he bursts through the door of the first Sarah Connor that he finds in the phone book and he shoots her with the laser-sighted pistol, he blinks when he fires the gun, and it's kind of in slow motion. So you can see him kind of like, you know, blinking with the recoil. And that's something that I kind of thought, oh, that's a shame, you know. And I was just listening to the audio commentary for Terminator 2. And James Cameron commented on that. He said, well, in the first one, we kind of, you know, Arnold got caught out a bit because you could see him in the film blinking when he was using the gun. But by the time we did T2, he had completely wiped that out. Like, he was just completely, you know, just stone cold, no blinking. And so that was something that, you know, either Arnold was conscious of and working on, or Cameron was saying, hey, come on, you need to do better, that sort of thing. And again, jumping ahead a little bit with Terminator 2, when we rewatched that for this series, Connie pointed out in the scene when John Connor and the Terminator are down in that kind of little basement in the desert with all the guns, the armory, John Connor's down there. I think he's holding a gun or something. He's looking through like some of the equipment, and the Terminator kind of just squeezes past him, and you see Arnold kind of go like, just like, maybe it's not that animated, but it's kind of like it's like a very human kind of, just gonna get by, And Connie was like, oh, that was a human thing that sneaked out of Arnold there. And I kind of joked because Cameron is very fond of defending even the smallest details of his movies. I joked to Connie like, well, I think it's perfectly permissible that along the journey, John had said, well, you need to like be more human and like go like that when you move, and that's probably why he did it. It's the programming learning, You can kind of reverse engineer these kind of quasi mistakes and just kind of make them make sense within the laws and logics of the way the movie's set out. But the Terminator, the original, he is just a full, complete killing machine. There's no learning. Well, there's learning in the sense of like stalking his prey, but there's no sense of humanity there. He's completely devoid of humanity, in fact, and that's what makes the film, I think, really threatening. It's not scary to me, but it's unnerving at times, and I love the way that his look progresses. Like at the beginning you could almost buy him as some sort of like meathead bodybuilder from LA, and he's got kind of the haircut with like the parting and stuff, and then he gets burned, and then it's like spiky, and it's more rough, and then he gets the jacket, and then he gets I'm not sure, does he have a leather jacket in I forgot, we just watched it a few weeks ago. I forget if he gets a proper legit leather jacket. I think he does. Yeah. At the beginning, it's kind of just a grey kind of jacket, but he gets the shades, and then the eyebrows singed off as like a really menacing look as well, and then he cuts the eye out, and then we just get the progression of the kind of makeup of the endoskeleton getting revealed, and really impressive animatronic effects. The shot where he's gouging his eyeball out is like a full Arnold Schwarzenegger head. And I think Stan Winston did an amazing job, and I'm glad that he, even though he was initially kind of looking down on this project, and then he read the script and really wanted to do it, I'm glad that he felt that way, and he got the job and did some of the great work that he did in the film. And they did the kind of the makeup on Arnold as opposed to the animatronic very briefly towards the end on the highway, when his kind of skin is peeled back and you see the eye and kind of the metal, and they thought, wow, this actually really works quite well. So by the time they did Terminator 2, they leaned into that even more for the last kind of the third act of Terminator 2. But even though you can tell that it's a fake Arnold Schwarzenegger head, like it's damn impressive. Like it's really well done. Even I'd forgotten the scene when he's working on his arm, and he's kind of going into the detail, and I think I already talked about that actually, but it's just that kind of stuff is just really, really impressive to me and just really stands out. Linda Hamilton, I think, is so good in the film. I often kind of almost underrate kind of her capabilities as an actress in the first film, because I always just think of her as Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, because that's by far the more memorable version of that character, and it's the more full, complete version of that character, who becomes the mother that raises the son who's going to be the leader of the revolution that saves the human race, or is potentially a savior of the human race. So when you see her whenever I think of the first film, I just think of that shot of her on the little moped. It's just like the kind of the front. This is like a really ridiculous detail to go into, but like the front part of the moped, it's like really clunky and like almost like it's like something just like you'd see a soccer mom just driving down the road with, like just very innocent. Even the bike she's on is kind of has an innocent flavor to it. And she's got the kind of 80s hair. She's a waitress, just like, like butter wouldn't melt. And she gets thrown into this world of violence and terror and threat. And right at the end, she really rises up. Up until that point, she's going through it by necessity. She's been thrown into this situation, but there's it really doesn't. It's only till the very last 5 minutes of the movie that 5-10 minutes of the movie that she really embraces what she has to become, and it's a great arc. It's just, I think she plays it really well in all stages of her character, getting from the beginning of the movie where it's just this just complete just normal woman with not really much to worry about but the weekend, and now she has to worry about the future of the human race, like living inside her belly, you know. Like that's a huge arc to take a character on. I think she does such a wonderful job at the beginning of the film of just acting like such a completely normal person, and feeling believable in that, and then the slow realization of what is going on. Like I'd forgotten the stuff where she sees the news reports about Sarah Connor, and you know the multiple Sarah Connors being murdered, and the realization on her face, and the kind of the panic when she gets to the club, the tech noir, and she's calling the police. It's such a brilliant progression. That scene in the bar is incredible. And one thing I have to really say, which is a super superficial thing to say, but this Blu-ray, the 2012 MGM remastered Terminator disc, is incredible. It's one of my favorite Blu-ray transfers ever. And honestly, it does enhance my enjoyment of the film, not least of all the fact that you can see Arnold Schwarzenegger's massive dick flopping between his legs in the opening shot of the film. Like, it's when he walks towards Bill Paxton and all that, and it's like kind of in the shadows, and you just see this, you just see the light dancing off this massive pendulum swinging between his Austrian legs. But yeah, so I remember seeing the Blu-ray for the first time being like, whoa, that I did not see that on the VHS. You know, it's and it's such a shame, and we'll talk about it later on, but how Terminator 2 just doesn't have the same treatment. But this it's an amazing Blu-ray transfer, one of my favorite looking films ever on Blu-ray. And I have a lot of Blu-rays. Like, it just, the grain is just so, the detail, you know, and it throws you right into those 80s streets, you know, and just the shots with Kyle Reese hanging out in the streets. He's looking for Sarah. He's looking dodgy in his little trench coat, and you can just feel the grime coming off of those kind of you know, the rain-soaked streets, or just the grime on the streets. It's like, this is the tangible quality to, literally, to me, the way the film looks. Like, it just I love that detail. And that goes down to the production design as well, in terms of like that bar that they created, the Tech Noir, and where they chose to shoot in the streets. It's mostly a night movie, and they captured the vibe of a city at night, where you feel like anything can be lurking in the shadows, and all the while, all this, you know, dodgy stuff, you know, that would normally happen in a city is now, you know, second stage to something that is so much bigger, with this larger than life story of a soldier being sent back through time, and a kind of, you know, a cybernetic organism who's been sent back through time, and they both are targeting this woman, one for protection, one for termination. And yeah, and I watching it again is probably this time round is probably the most I've been aware of the aggressive exposition in the film, but it's a really great way to do it, where Kyle Reese is just like, gets Sarah in a car, and they're just racing down the road, and he's like, this is what's happening, this is what's going to happen in the future. Like, it's really like, you almost, it's a really good way to shield it, you know. And there are times when they stop, and he'll tell her stories and stuff, and then that gets kind of supplemented with flashback sequences. I love the image of Kyle going through the kind of the slums of the future, and just seeing the people there just living with nothing, and that one visual of the kids looking at the TV and the glow of the TV on their faces, and then we cut to the reverse angle, and we see that they're just looking at a broken TV screen with a few you know, lit flames inside. It's just a way to keep warm, and just to look at something, anything, you know. That's a brilliant image. I'd forgotten that you see another Terminator in the flashback sequence in that slum section, when a Terminator kind of infiltrates the area, and I'm pretty sure, again, because the transfer is so fucking good, you could see that the guy's got like goggles on to make the red eyes, which is kind of like, you know, it kind of reveals the magic a little bit. But I'd forgotten that there's another Terminator in the film, very briefly, because that character is so symbolic and emblematic of Arnold as an action star, as a movie star. And this is the film that really just launched him into the stratosphere. He'd done films in the 70s. I've seen one from the 70s with Kirk Douglas, Cactus Jack. I think it has a different name, but I knew it as Cactus Jack when I was a kid. And I was like, wow, the Terminator, you know, in a comedy role. But he'd done kind of like little things like that. And then Conan was probably the big breakout for him. But really, the Terminator like made him like that. He was made from that film, I think. And you just look at the run that Arnold went on after that, after the Terminator, and it is absolutely insane. And we'll talk about that more around the Terminator 2 videos, but, you know, this really made him. And it's not difficult to see why. And interestingly enough, the iconic line of the film, "I'll be back," which is, you know, that's that became a huge part of, of Arnold's kind of cultural cachet was "I'll be back." He'd do it in almost every movie. And I love the movies the most when they kind of cop to it, like in Last Action Hero when he's like, "I'll be back." Ha! You didn't know I was going to say that, did you? And Danny's like, "You always say that." It's like everyone's just waiting for you to say it. It's like your calling card at this point, And then in, I think, the second Expendables film, when he says to Bruce Willis, "I'll be back," and Bruce is like, "No, you stay here. I'll be back. You've been back enough." And then we bring it full circle with what I hope is the last time he ever kind of even hints at it in Terminator Dark Fate, when he says, "I won't be back." And that could be like a really cheesy line that kind of like, oh yeah, he won't be back, but he delivers it with such reverence that it's really fucking good. So I like the journey from 1984 to 2019 with that iconic line that almost didn't make it into the movie in the form that it was written. It was written as "I'll be back," and Arnold really disagreed with it, and he tried to fight James Cameron on it because he couldn't pronounce it. He couldn't say "I'll," and knowing his accent, especially when it was a lot thicker in his earlier years of acting, I'll, like, I can imagine how he would stumble over that a little bit. So he suggested to Cameron, "Why wouldn't I just say I will be back?" And Cameron's just like, "No, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't have the same cadence, doesn't have the same punch to it. So it has to be I'll be back." Just, that simple dun dun dun. And man, did it work. I mean, it's a great moment. It's not just like, oh, the line. It's like, it's a great, it's a great moment, even if when the car is running towards the police station, the cop looks up and there's headlights, and then the car crashes through and the headlights aren't on. And then you see a very obvious dummy getting crushed against the wall. But hopefully I haven't broken the illusion for anyone in terms of the multiple mistakes in that scene. And also the fact that when Arnold looks at the glass partition that the cop is behind, he looks forward and you can see him kind of assessing, like, can I destroy this? And you can see his real eyes behind the sunglasses. At this point, he's supposed to have one eye cut out. So yeah, that scene is riddled with mistakes, but it doesn't matter because it's fucking awesome. Again, so I'm just rambling about stuff that I love. I do really enjoy the kind of the fake out stuff at the end where it's like, okay, they've blown it up, they've killed him, and then it slowly rises out of the flames, and that kind of chord, whatever it is, that kind of the way that whatever piece of instrumentation was used in the score, that kind of, it's so ominous, that I can't even like do it with my voice, but when the Terminator slowly rises out of the metal, it's like, it feels like there's bits of like these kind of moving bits of debris out of the way as it just stands up. And it's like, oh my god, and then it chases them down. That's probably the only part where the effects really have aged poorly, is the stop motion stuff. And Cameron actually wanted to do most of the endoskeleton in stop motion, and Stan Winston really fucking pushed to get full-size endoskeleton pieces made. So they would have, like, and I think I've talked about that before as well, where it's like on the shoulder, kind of like a full maquette on the kind of the puppeteer's shoulders, and then even the foot. And again, I might be kind of retreading old ground because I'm trying to get these details into the videos, but I think that the stop motion has aged quite poorly, but I don't think that's a bad thing. It kind of has a charm to it, I suppose, but it just creates this kind of, how is this going to end? And then obviously Kyle Reese blows it up, and then it's still alive. It's still clawing at Sarah. So I just enjoy that. And then you get the real satisfying finale where she just crushes it in that press and just says, "You're terminated, fucker." It's just like, yes, love it. And then the final scene is just so, there's such a weight to it. There's almost like a mysticism to that final scene to me, because you now see her in that image that he had of her, the photograph, and it's like, oh my god, that's where it's from. And her recording these audio cassettes for her son, I found that to be really touching and kind of cheesy. And I'll touch on this. I wrote a big Twitter thread last night, and as of the recording of this video, it'll probably be way off of when I post it. But for me right now, when I'm filming this video, I posted this long Twitter thread about James Cameron and my theory that Cameron has always had a cheesy sensibility to him as a writer. I think he's a great writer and a great storyteller, but he's always leaned into the kind of the cheesiness and been quite earnest with it. And so the line in The Terminator when Kyle Reese reveals that he's in love with Sarah, and he says, "I've come across time for you, Sarah. I love you. I always have." It's like, I almost cringed saying that line. It's kind of an excruciating line on paper. But when you have a film that's so great, and you have a really good performer like Michael Biehn to shoulder that line and make you believe it, it kind of works. But if you just look at it kind of objectively, it's a really cheesy line. It's a really cheesy concept for the story that he's in love with this woman he's only seen in an image. But it's like that kind of fantasy land of love at first sight in which the rules of real life don't really apply. It's more of this kind of almost Shakespearean. It takes on this kind of Shakespearean quality, I suppose. Not that I'm saying that the Terminator is, Shakespeare-like, but, it has that classical feel to it. I don't know, where it's, it wouldn't really work that way in real life, but it's a nice kind of piece of romanticism in a story that is, for the most part, really filled with dread, and it's quite nihilistic as well in terms of the way that it portrays what the future is going to be. It's just death and destruction, and here's this sparkling kind of moment of hope and love amidst all of it, and that's really cheesy, but I think it works. And the end of the film, it has a weight to it, and it's really sweet. And then you just ride off into the distance, literally with "There's a storm coming, I know," And again, that's kind of a cheesy line, but it just for some reason it all just works. It all just fits into place, and the film is raw. It's rough around the edges at times in terms of some of the special effects or even some of the acting here and there, but it just has something that I don't think can even be defined. It's a great film. You even get Dick Miller in the film. I mean, how can you argue with a film that brings you Dick Miller in a very small role where, I don't think I'll ever forget that moment when I first saw the film where he's like, "Hey, you can't do that." Wrong. Boom. Like, holy shit. What a way to set up. Well, I guess you already set up the Terminator at the beginning when he kills the guys, or, at least, severely injures and stabs the guys at the observatory up there in the Hollywood Hills, but it's like, okay, so he needs clothes, he's got clothes, and then what's he doing? Needs guns, he's gonna blow someone away. Like, this is a guy who's just, there's no remorse, as Kyle Reese says. I love that stuff in the police station as well, where it's just like, what would you do if a guy came in with all of this stuff? And it's like, of course you wouldn't believe it, of course you'd get excited as a psychologist, like, I could make a career out of this guy, like, this is genius. I love this stuff. And Lance Henriksen kind of like, cracking jokes here and there. But then just the dread when he turns up at the police station, and there's almost like a part of you that's satisfied that he turns up. It's like, great, they'll see that this is real, but then it's like, no, this is horrible. He's killing everyone. It's a massacre. And at this point, or at that point, I should just say that last little sentence you just heard, my camera shut off because my memory card was full. It's like, great, they'll see that this is real, but then it's like, no, this is horrible. He's killing everyone. It's a massacre. But then, it's a massacre. 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 So I've been rambling on about this film so long now, even the camera and the memory card's just like, dude, just stop. I'm done. I'm full. Like, we can't do this anymore. You need to stop talking. So it is what it is. What more can you really say about a film like The Terminator? In my case, probably a lot more. And I'm sure in other people's cases, they could talk about it for a very long time too. It's one of those films that has that effect on people, that there's so much to talk about. And you could just ramble on for a very long time and still have lots more to say. And I'm sure once I turn the camera off, I'll think, oh shit, there's that I could have talked about. Michael Biehn, I talked about, I think, before in the previous video, where he really shoulders a lot, and like, he is that kind of the badass kind of hero character, but there's such a fallibility to him. You feel like he's vulnerable, especially contrasted with the Terminator. And when he tells Sarah that he loves her, there's just, again, it just feels like you're seeing this boy who's just been stripped naked of all his feelings, and is just completely, he's just on display, and he doesn't really like that. But she reciprocates, and kind of, it's nice that they get that little moment, before everything goes to hell. And that's a nice kind of, it's just nicely paced story as well. It's very, it's on the run, it's on the move, pretty much the whole movie, but I love the way that it's all laid out. And just, I think that's really where Cameron's strengths come in with his storytelling. There's always just this forward momentum, I think, in all of his films, where it's just this, it's goal, and maybe it is kind of writing 101 of just constantly setting up the next kind of, mission point in a way, even if it isn't technically a mission or anything, but just like something a character needs to do. And they get there and they do it, and then that leads to the next thing, and it's a very fluid exchange of plot points that keep the thing moving. And especially in the Terminator, when it is essentially a chase movie, the Terminator is after them, and it's not always completely on their tail. I don't even think that there's there really isn't like a scene between Kyle Reese and the Terminator, except for that the tech noir scene at the beginning. They don't really come up close to the Terminator all that often, but there's the car chase and everything. I love the see. I just keep going and going. I love the car chase. First, it's just like they're kind of laying low, and the Terminator's just scanning like a CCTV camera. You know, the eyes are going, and then the head is slowly following along with it, which is something that they talk about in one of the behind the scenes documentaries or one of the interviews with Arnold, where he talks about how it's like trying to be a machine. But when he sees them, the look on his, like the eyes widen, and it's like, and he pulls the gun out and just starts shit. Like, I don't know. There's something really unsettling about that. I think that he just did such a great job with that role, and it was great to see what he continued to do with that role, which we'll talk about in future videos. But for now, I'll leave it there with the Terminator. I love this film, and we get into the age-old discussion: Terminator 1 or Terminator 2. It really is like it's a case of picking between your two favorite meals. You know, they're just so different, and you have them for very different reasons, and they satisfy you on different days. You know, you don't always want to have steak every single night; it would get old, and you don't want to just have steak all the time anyway. You want to have different, pleasures, I suppose. I don't know. There's just, I think sometimes you have a series of films where every subsequent film feels pretty much the same. And while Terminator 2 and Terminator 1 do have similar frameworks in terms of how the story is constructed, like someone comes back from the future to be a protector and to be a Terminator, so you have a very similar story in that sense. But then I just think they are two very different films in tone, in execution, in ideas, and so I think it's a brilliant 1-2 punch, Terminator and Terminator 2, and it's just, it's difficult to separate them. I think the first film was almost more impressive because of what was produced out of the limitations. And I think Terminator 2 is almost more impressive because it just is so much more accomplished. And I think Cameron was a much better director at that point, and the story is a lot stronger and has richer themes. But I think that there's something so admirable about the Terminator in terms of, again, what was pulled off with what they were working with. And there's just a raw simplicity to it that I think sometimes you don't need much more than that. And Cameron really proved with the Terminator that you can make a successful film, and in terms of how much an audience enjoys it, and also how much an audience will be willing to pay to go see it again, with a very simple and clear-cut story that's done very well and is very engaging and captivating, and just captures something that's, again, raw, rough around the edges, but ultimately just I don't know. I'm trailing off here, but the one thing I was going to mention at the end was the credits, which was added to the Terminator at the end of the film on the home video releases, which is that the producers would like to acknowledge the works of Harlan Ellison. Now, Harlan Ellison was a writer who did a lot of work in television, and he sued Orion Pictures because the Terminator, he believed, had been plagiarized from his work. Now, he loved the film, but he believed that James Cameron had stolen the idea from him. He wrote an episode of The Outer Limits called Soldier, which is allegedly, I haven't seen it myself, about two men who are, I think it's like hundreds of years into the future, and they're sent back to, the 60s in America, and one is going to protect a woman, the other is going to kill the woman. And so he believed that it was infringing on his own original story. And that's kind of like, oh, wow, interesting. So it wasn't this massive original thing that some people made it out to be, or was it? Because James Cameron didn't really say anything about it, because obviously there was a kind of lawsuit going on, and Harlan Ellison won the lawsuit, which is why his name is put at the end of the film on the home video releases. But in recent years, Cameron has said that he wasn't allowed to speak about it, but he doesn't really care about that now, because and he's not going to go into detail, but he did say that he completely disagreed with that ruling, that he won the lawsuit. He's not happy about it. Cameron doesn't agree with it. And I guess he's not happy about the fact that Harlan Ellison gets a credit at the end of the film, but nevertheless he does. And that's something I never knew about, and it was just, in watching this a few weeks ago, I was like, oh, who's Harlan Ellison? Because I'd never heard about anything that the Terminator had been adapted from. But yeah, so it might be a complete coincidence. It might be that Cameron did pick a few things here and there, and as we're going to get into more and more throughout this series, I do think Cameron is a bit of a revisionist in his own story and his own, filmography. So that's just one of those things that we'll get into a little bit more. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was something that Cameron had kind of seen that episode of television and took a little bit of the story from, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong about that. And it's just interesting to me to kind of look at the various genesis points of his films in terms of where the stories first came from, right? I mean, with the Terminator, it's kind of his original idea, but is it really? We don't know. And then we have Aliens, which is based on an original sequel, and so he has to work within the framework of an already existing movie and story. Then you have True Lies, which is a remake of a French film. Then you have Titanic, which is based on historical fact that he then layers his own fictional story into. So he's worked in many different ways in terms of how the stories for his movies have originated. But anyway, we'll get into that more as we continue to move through the works of James Cameron. That is it for the Terminator. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you mercifully with the next one.